everybody, and welcome to
Oh.
Brother. So I used to start sermons sometimes at our old church. I would just to freak out newcomers because it was hilarious. Like before I started a sermon, I would get real serious and I'd grab the mic and I'd say, "Let us pray," and I would go, "Oh, oh." The looks on the new
Oh
people's
man, that's
faces were like,
hilarious.
"What kind of church did we just walk into?" Anyway, so
Oh man, that's
gotta
huge.
have a little levity when you're talking about the Ten Commandments. You know what I'm saying?
Oh man, 15, 10.
Yes, I mean the Ten Commandments.
Oh man, listen. If everybody could see us now, when we were in the same city, we would sit across the table from each other, and we had microphones in front of us, and they kind of looked like the microphones that Elvis may have sang into back in the day. But
Oh yeah. Oh.
since the establishment of Mission Control in North Carolina, and then the West Coast Central or Mid America Central, where is Colorado? Is it? That's not West Coast. Where is that
Where is
geographically?
Colorado?
Like what do you consider Colorado? Mountain region?
Well, I mean, everyone calls it the West.
The
So,
West.
we're clearly not Midwest. They say the West, even though I actually lived on the West Coast. So I guess it's just like the mountainy West thing. I don't know. Is that what you call it? The Rocky Mountains. That's what people say.
Okay, well then we have
The
the
Rocky
the,
Mountains.
the Rocky Mountain headquarters of the podcast here set up, and for the first time ever, we both now look like we could call an NFL game or a Monday Night Football game.
I was feeling more like I was landing a plane. You know, bring her in. Bring her right here. Right here. You know, Control Tower 1. Your landing gear is down. Anyway.
If we would have been set up like this with the whole headset thing when we were both in North Carolina, we could have said NASCAR, and then the whole thing could be
Oh,
like,
that's
well,
true.
they're turning left, they're still turning left. Once again, a
Yeah,
left turn.
left turn. I never got NASCAR. I was always like, why don't you just set up a little camping chair down by I-25 and watch cars drive? I mean, same thing. Like I don't know, it's free. I don't understand.
Yeah, and
And
some
you
of
might
those
get a
people are
shooting or
going about
two.
as fast
you
as
know?
NASCAR. So,
Yeah, exactly.
oh
Especially
man,
North Carolina. Holy cow.
oh man. Well, we made it through the first two commandments last
All
episode.
right.
And although I was excited to talk about those, I'm looking at them now. I am really excited about these next two. I
Oh
have been
boy.
looking forward to this because I think that my impression is that people are going to hear, at least some of the people listening, are going to hear something very different than perhaps they have heard before about what the third and fourth commandment really mean.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think that's probably the case.
So,
So yeah.
um, the short version of the third commandment is, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain." Now, growing up in Alabama, what that means is you don't run around saying GD with everything.
Right. That's the name and thing, right?
Yeah.
Or if you say like JC,
Oh
that's
yeah.
the same thing,
Oh
right?
yeah. But in the South, it's not even JC. It's making sure you stress both syllables in Jesus. Jesus. Like if you do that, same thing as GD. So,
Okay.
but yeah. So that is what it means. Which is honestly, if there was an 11th commandment, it would be something about in the South. It would be something to do with bless their heart or God bless them. Right? That would be in there
Right.
somewhere, very
Right.
close to using the Lord's name in vain. But um, I guess the question is that really what it means?
I mean, I would say right off the bat, no. Now I say no with a caveat, but yeah, I mean, I kind of heard the same thing. I think growing up, like to use the name of the Lord in vain was to say GD or JC in the form of an expletive, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, or you're expressing exasperation, or you're using an expletive. So I remember, like being taught that in maybe elementary school or middle school or something, very forcefully in the little church that I grew up in. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to replace GD with gallbladder because that will be better. So, oh yeah, it worked out great. I started
Gallbladder.
replacing all cuss words with body parts, and it was awesome. It was like, stub my toe. I'm like, gallbladder. People be like, what? You get mad. You're like, pancreas. What a day I'm having. So I don't know why I did that, but I did that. It seemed to work okay. I
My
don't know
mom
that my
called
body
those
parts.
bywords.
What's that?
My mom called those bywords. You could get by with them.
Bywords?
Yeah, you could get by with them.
Oh, I see. Now I
So,
did that for a
and gall
while
darn it was a
until
big
my.
one.
Oh yeah, gall darn it, gallbladder is what I would say. Golly gosh
Gallbladder.
darn. But then I remember you couldn't say OMG either.
Oh, really?
Like wasn't was that taking the Lord's name in vain too? It was to us.
Yeah, come to think of it, it was frowned upon, but it wasn't at the same level as GD.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like we could say like oh my gosh, but
Yeah.
you know if you said oh my god, like in especially depending on the tone that you use or maybe what it was happening with that, like that was definitely taking the Lord's name in vain and it was naughty. And I was using body parts like I said for a long time until my Mormon neighbor took offense to it. So if you don't know, I grew up next to the Mormon bishop of the whole stake for our region, right? So if you don't know Mormonism very well, if you live in Idaho, there's a lot of Mormons in Idaho. It's why Napoleon Dynamite was filmed in Idaho, and also almost all Mormons acted in that movie, including Napoleon Dynamite himself. Especially southern Idaho is like heavily Mormon. So I don't know if you guys knew any of that.
So this is a whole revelation to me. I didn't know the guy that
Oh
did
wow.
Napoleon Dynamite was Mormon.
Oh yeah, he was Napoleon Mormonite. You didn't know that?
I did not know that. That's
I mean, it
crazy.
is chocked full of Mormon humor. And if you know Mormons and you know Mormon humor, I remember watching Napoleon Dynamite and going, my buddy John, and I'll just give him a shout out, John Calderwood, love you, man. Um, he would be laughing his little hiney off, like watching this movie because it's Mormon humor to the T. So I remember watching it and being like, wow, this is so Mormon and yet so funny. So but anyway, so growing up next to literally, he was my next door neighbor. The bishop, if you don't know anything about Mormonism, you are divided up into stakes. So the Mormon religion, if you're not FLDS, which is the fundamentalists who do the polygamy and stuff, if you're not that, if you're like a normal Mormon or like a contemporary Mormon, which they don't even like the term Mormon anymore because of the baggage it holds, they like Latter Day Saints. And oftentimes they'll just say, "Oh, we're just Christians, just like you." And that's kind of what they are being taught more now. Is like we're
Except
just
for what we
Christians.
believe. Other than
Yeah,
what we believe
yeah.
aside, we're just like you.
Except for the things that radically contradict the Bible, we're Christians. I don't know, but that's kind of what they're taught to say now. In fact, I remember one time I was downtown and there was elder so and so and elder so and so, and they're always like 19 years old, but they're elder so and so. And I remember they were trying to evangelize to somebody in downtown Denver. And I was there with a group of kids, and I thought, I'm going to go, you know, just have fun with these guys. So I walked up to him, and I remember asking the guy, I was like, what? I said, tell me what the difference is between what you're teaching as a Mormon and what Christians teach and believe. What's the difference? And he looks at me and he goes, nothing. That's literally what he said, because they're taught to say, oh, there's no difference. And so then I started to say, well, what about, you know, the fact that Jesus isn't God in your theology? What about that, you know, the fact that you can become a God? And that's when he backed right off. Well, you're a Trinitarian. I'm like, yeah, that's because that's historical biblical Christianity, of which you have deviated from in a major way. But anyway, um, so I remember, you know, John Calderwood is awesome. I love him. Good man, very Mormon. My best friend for 10 years. And I remember I was using the body part substitution, and one time he goes, you know, Nathan, you just can't do that, because all you're doing is substituting. So you're really still using the Lord's name in vain. You're just substituting, and so you really shouldn't say that at all. And I thought, oh man, now I can't say anything. Like, how do I live?
Like, what do I say if I stub a toe? I don't.
Right. I mean, nothing. Like, that just doesn't seem right at all.
Yeah.
You know. So yeah, this was kind of posited as this is breaking the third commandment: you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. That's sort of weird way to interpret that scripture.
Okay.
If you really look at how it's written, in particular in Hebrew, you'll have a lot of translations that would translate it like this. In fact, I think I looked up, the NIV would translate it something like this. Oh yeah, so the NIV says about that commandment, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. So that's a bit different, and I don't know, how does that speak to you? Like, if you were just reading that and it says, "Oh, don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain," versus "don't misuse," like how would one misuse that? But of course, we need to understand what he means by name too, because that's like lost on us, I think,
Yeah.
too.
I'm trying to lay aside what I do know and go, how would that hit me, and try to process it. How would it hit me if that were just, to come from left field? Don't misuse his name. I
Which
would think it.
vain
I would
is
think
a
it would
good.
mean in that case. I would think it would mean you can't misrepresent who he is, or you can't
Right.
misrepresent when speaking of him or presenting him in discussions who he really is. That's the way that would
Yes.
land on me.
Yeah. So let's go back to like what this really means. Like, is using the name your God in vain, using his name as a cuss word? It's sort of hard. If I were to argue for that, and we'll talk about this in a second. In other words, if I were to make a case that this commandment, the third commandment, is broken by using Jesus as a swear word, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
um, it would be difficult for me to make that case. I probably could, but I would have to lump it in under an umbrella of a lot of other things. So let me explain what I mean. So when he says, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, you have to start with, you shall not take the name. Well, what are we talking about when he says we take the name? Well, here's what it means, on a lot of, at least partially. So he's here, Moses is using terms that would have been very common to an ancient Near Eastern hearer of this, whereas we don't use the term name in a very in kind of the way that they would. So of course, back then, and I think maybe I talked about this before, I can't remember if we ever discussed this, but back then, if I was a king and I wanted to send you, let's say I'm King Nathan, which that would rock, and you're King Keith, okay? So let's say that's the deal. And you live 300 miles away from me. Well, I can't just like call you or send you an email or text you or something like that. The only way I can talk to you is if I physically and personally go there. Now, as a king, I would almost never do that. That would be very unusual for me to be, for numerous reasons. But one, it's really expensive. Two, it's very, very dangerous. And three, you are taking yourself out of your place of authority and kind of rendering your government um, not as operational as it was once before. So those are the three reasons why almost never, unless there was some deep need, or maybe you really wanted to honor another king, or there was some kind of an emergency, like you're trying to head off a war or something like that. That's like the only time, or you're negotiating a really big deal that's like beyond big, that maybe you would leave. Otherwise, you're never leaving your building to go talk to someone else. However, we still need to communicate, right? There needs to be some kind of communication between kings. So I would commission a cohort or somebody from my court that I would sit down and instruct them, and they would actually live with me. Like your cohort person that you would send would typically live with you all the time. They would get to know you very well. Oftentimes, they would eat dinner with you, eat all your meals with you. They would hang out with you constantly, and it was to get to know your personality. It was to get to know how you talked, what you valued, your personality, all these kinds of things. And then when they told you something, you had to memorize it word for word. So you would memorize long things, word for word as the cohort, or sometimes they call them the messenger. There's lots of different terms for them. But then they would send you as their representative, right, with a runner or maybe with a group of people or something like that, and you would run or ride all the way to deliver the message of whatever that was as the cohort. So I would walk in to King. So I would talk to my person and send them to King Keith. And then my cohort would walk into King Keith's palace and say, in the name of Nathan. Now, once that term is invoked, you, as the cohort, are now operating in the absolute full authority of the king in the way and the spirit in which that king would have delivered the message. So it wasn't just reciting, like memorizing, it wasn't just reciting what they said. You were acting as them, for them, as if you were them.
So, for all intents and purposes, within the interaction, you have taken on the identity of that whom you represent, and you're
Absolutely.
showing up in the court of another king of another kingdom on behalf of the first king in the first kingdom, which you are a citizen of, and anything that you say from that point on is exactly like the king said it, with that authority, and knowing, based on what you just said, knowing, spending all the time with the king, knowing the personality, knowing the
Mm-hmm.
inflection of the voice, knowing
Mm-hmm.
really the intent behind the message, having known that person's personality and thoughts and behaviors so well, you're delivering more than the message. You're delivering every underlying or undercurrent in the message. So it is exactly like the king was standing there, correct?
Absolutely. You're not
Okay.
just delivering the message, you're delivering the person. And when you say in the name of and call off whoever you're in the name of, like there is no difference between you and the person, the king. There is absolutely no difference. Not only that, but once you say in the name of, if that king has a question and you answer it, it is as if the king is there answering it. There is absolutely no difference at all. So when anyone said in the name of, that was a very big deal. It was, like we said, it was literally to assume the identity of that person in every way, including their authority. And you have kingdom authority. That's why it was so important that you got this correct. Because if you didn't get it correct, then you might obviously the consequences could be quite dire, if that were the
Yeah.
case. So it's, in fact, you remember when uh, they came to arrest Jesus? You remember this?
Yes.
And Peter kind of freaks out and takes his sword and like chops his ear off. Well, I kind of always joked about that in sense of like just joking that Peter was not a swordsman, and he was kind of going. I think he was going for his head, but he actually missed and chopped his ear, And Jesus is like, "Oh man, I'm so sorry about that," puts his ear back on. So I kind of joke about that, but in reality, one of the ways you declared war was to take your sword out and chop the ear off of the messenger who came to you. So it was probably Peter's way of saying, declaring war, because he viewed Jesus' messiahship as meaning something that it didn't really mean. But he was trying to declare war against the Roman Empire.
Wow.
So
That's new. I never heard that before.
Yeah, so that's one of the ways you declare war in the ancient Near East, was to literally chop the ear off. That was your way of saying, we're done, now it's war or whatever. So if somebody came to you and said, in the name of King whoever, if you were to attack them or chop their ear off, that would be like you're declaring war. so
Wow.
so this is a very big deal in the ancient Near East. And the name that you had, like the quite literal name that you had, mattered greatly. And it's kind of hard for like white culture, especially American culture, I think, to understand this. Like when you have a native background, like I myself, that one of the ways, like, I introduce myself is I say my name is Nathan, son of Lauren, son of John. Well, the reason I say that is because in our culture, where you come from matters a lot. It's part of who you are. It's part of your identity. Your name isn't just a label. It encompasses part of your identity.
You
So
represent
that's
your
how it's used
ancestry
here.
as much as anything else.
Correct. You represent your ancestry and your family. So it was a very big deal in my house. I remember my dad would always tell me, like, you never bring shame to the family, because your actions aren't just your actions. Like, your actions don't just bring shame to you, they bring shame to the family. Do you see what I mean? Because we bear the same name. Now, I realize that Americans don't really think like that because we're very individualistic. But ancient Near Eastern cultures, they absolutely thought like that.
As
Like,
a
you are
collectivist society.
right. You're impugning the whole your name, by your actions. It could be good or bad, right? You can bring honor to your family. Like, if you're honored, that is a great honor to your mother and father because they bear the same name. So it's a big deal. In Osage culture, one of the ways you honor your elders or your father and your mother is by accomplishing things that are great, that bless the community. You don't have to honor them directly. And in fact, the greater honor is to honor them indirectly. So if you honor their name, um, that's greater than like giving them a present or something. That would be considered weird. Like, as a for instance, in Osage culture, this kind of ties into this idea of name and honor. On your birthday, you don't get presents. On your birthday, you buy everyone else you love a present as a way of honoring them for giving you life and for being in your life. So on your birthday, it's incumbent upon you to honor the people in your life worthy of honor. So if you receive a present on the birthday of an Osage, you are being deeply honored by that person. Anyway, that's just a little cultural tidbit.
Yeah, my kids will not enjoy listening to that part of the podcast. I
Yeah.
have almost as many as you do, and that'd be a lot of presents they'd have to buy. So,
Yes.
but
But yeah, it's a big deal if you get a present from an Osage on your birthday, because that's on their birthday. Because that means you're being highly honored. But anyway, back to the idea of the name. Do not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Well, what is the name? What does that mean? Well, you think about what it means. It's like the everything about who God is wrapped up in his name. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
who is
Yeah.
this God? It's wrapped up in his name. So it's essentially to take the name of the Lord your God in vain, to cut to the chase. It's the reason that, like, the NIV translates it, misuse his name. But that is even far, that's not even a very good translation. It would be to represent God using his name in a way that's a far cry from his nature and character in reality.
Yeah,
So I
it
don't know,
would.
does that make sense?
Yeah, it would seem that it would be something akin to um, identity theft
Yeah, or at least
for his
twisting.
character.
Yes, to impugn his character. And I mean, it's kind of like it's on along the same lines as blasphemy. It's the same kind of force, which of course you don't find in the Ten Commandments. Like, but this is kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's like if I were to make an analogous statement, like blasphemy in the New Testament is like taking the Lord's name in vain in the Old Testament.
It's a
It's kind of the same idea.
it's a misrepresentation of the character and integrity of God himself, the nature of God.
Exactly. So if you are, there'd be a number of ways to do that. It would be, I would say this is kind of a broad stroke, but like the things done in the Crusades, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
in the name of Jesus, we're going to slaughter all these babies and
Yeah.
rape women, things like that. Like that would be to take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Because you're saying that what I'm doing is in his name as if he approves it. And it's clearly isn't. That would be to break that commandment.
Yeah. Or the
Because you're doing
Inquisition
something.
or anything like that.
Yeah, like things like that is to, but this, by the way, happens all the time from pulpits all over America.
Yeah, that's what I was just being the note taker I am. The two things I wrote down were false prophecy,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that would tie into it, right? Thus saith the
Yes.
Lord, when that's not what he said.
Yes.
Or misrepresenting a message as much as the character of God. So things like, and you could tell me if this is a stretch here, things like, before God can bless you, he has to punish you.
Yes.
And he
It'd be
says,
to
you're going
Mr.
to
Yeah.
go through this, and I'm going to punish you, and I'm going to, here we go. I know you can't wait for this one.
Oh, here we go.
Right? You got to go through the pressing.
Crush.
We got to crush this oil out of you.
Right.
And once we completely obliterate you and make your life miserable and painful, hey,
Right.
then we'll bless you. Then
Maybe.
then it's all then just be patient. But don't ask for patience, because it's going to be worse crushing if you do that. And then, I'll bless you. But that
Right.
all seems to be anti the character and nature of God as we truly do know it. And
Yes.
if we're telling other people that, if we're indoctrinating them or inculcating them with that belief system, then we are using his name in vain. Is that not correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Because if you're saying this in the name of Jesus, so it could be a teaching or an action that you are doing in the name of God, saying this is something God approves of. I mean, this would be to use his name in vain, to use his name in a way that does not represent him, that you are not representing his nature and his character as his nature and his character are. Like, this is to use his name in vain. So, I guess you could stretch it, to include cuss words, because that would be sort of the literal using his name in a way that I would consider disrespectful, dishonoring.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't use somebody else. Like I don't stub my toe and go, Mother Keith, or something like that. Like, I would consider that disrespectful. It would be dishonoring to you to use your name in such a way.
Yeah.
But it would be more dishonoring. Like if you make this concrete, it makes more sense. Like it would be more dishonoring for me to go over to someone's house and say, in the name of Keith, we're going to beat the living crap out of you and steal all your stuff because Keith told us to.
Yeah. Because that's his
is
will.
yeah, because that's Keith's will. It would. I mean, I would imagine you'd be horribly offended by that and
Yeah.
like horrified that somebody would do something like that in your name. And see, the with it when it's God, it becomes so much bigger. Because if you think about something like this, like I mean, I've had a little bit of authority in my life. I know you have authority at work and stuff like that. So, like, people would do stuff at church. Like, I don't know. This happened so many times. Like, I had a lot of stuff in the youth room from the church. I mean, a lot of stuff, fun stuff. I had tons of games. I had pool table, pinball. I had multiple pinball machine. I had air hockey table, ping pong table. It was like a whole arcade. That I kind of built in there after a while. I had like basketball hoops inside for a while. Like, I mean, you name it, I probably had it in there. And it was super fun. It had a lot of really cool stuff in there that people always wanted to borrow. You know, well, I don't know how many times when I'd go, "Hey guys, where the heck is our, whatever it was? We're missing such and such." And one of my leaders would come up to me and go, "Oh, well, somebody came and borrowed it." And I was like, "Well, did they ask?" And they said, "Oh, well, they said that you said they could take it." And I'd be like, "I never said that." They're like, "Oh, you didn't?" I said, "No." So people will take your name because they know people respect it or you have authority or whatever. And they'll say, "Oh, well, he said I could do such and such," or he said he approved of whatever it was, and you didn't. That would be to take your name in vain. And that's what he's forbidding here, is to take the Lord's name. Well, God says, such and such, or the Lord told me. That's to take his name in vain because you're misrepresenting him when he didn't tell you, when that's not okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it not only makes sense, what I think really would land on most people is it's so much easier and less threatening if it just means don't say GD.
Right.
Because when you
Right.
realize what that actually means and the authority that we have, then it really becomes that much more of an imperative to make sure that we get that message right, that we accurately represent God, and not only accurately represent him, but we better be careful in what we actually do say when we send that message forward, or when we not just take action, but represent him in any way, shape, form, or fashion. It carries a significant weight because it is significantly important.
Yes.
And this is a caution that you better do it right. Because the next
Yes.
half of that is essentially saying, "For the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain."
Well, so ask yourself why. In other words, why would he include that caveat? He will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Why must that be the case?
Well, it has to be. Well, let's go back to what we talked about last week or last episode about the undergirding thing for all of the commandments are to maximize love.
Right.
So if you misrepresent God, if you use his name, if you use that authority in a way that is contrary to God's nature, then it is harmful. It does just the opposite of maximize love. It hurts people. It puts them in bondage.
Yes.
It tears them down. It does not build them up. So there is a negative consequence simply of doing that, which is a serious matter for a God who loves us for our sake, not for his sake.
Which is so, especially in the context, right? Because we're talking, these are obviously given to Israelites in the middle of an area where they are surrounded by pagans, right? So you're going to be totally surrounded by pagans. So how important is it that they represent God for who he is all the time and in everything
Yeah.
they say and do in order to maximize love? Because they are sending a message from where they are to all the nations around them. So God's like, I can't leave you unpunished if you continue to act in ways that misrepresent me, which of course he does, right? I mean, he lets them sin for like 500 years. Then finally he's like, I got to send Babylon, we got to stop this because you're my people. You're supposed to be my covenant people, and you're not acting like that. So you're not representing me. You're not presenting me in the way that actually represents my nature and character. So I'm going to have to put a stop to this. And of course, that had to happen multiple times. you know,
Yeah, that's it really using his name in vain diminishes his glory in the eyes of other
yes,
people as well. Essentially, is
yes,
what you're getting at here. And so to think about this a little further, even in bringing it into today, the things that we hear, I alluded to it or mentioned it directly earlier. The message is like God God loves you. He wants to bless you, but he really only wants to bless you. And by the way, the bigger the blessing, the more he really wants to punish you first before he
yeah. Well,
blesses you.
the bigger the calling in particular,
Yeah.
the more he has to torture you.
Yeah.
It's like if you have a really big call, like you're a prophet or an apostle to the nations,
Yeah.
you're going to have to be tortured for like 50 years.
So much so that things are going to pour out of you because you've completely been squashed. That.
Yeah.
So if you consider that, why would anybody go, man, I really want to follow that guy?
right.
That really sounds like love to me. No, it sounds like an
Yes.
abusive parent to me. And we know
Yes.
that's not who he is at all. So
No.
it really does, it does misrepresent him to the point where people are going to say, and probably do frequently say, no, I don't want any part of that. You mean you want me to serve a
hmm
God that you tell me loves me, but he really just wants to punish me, and that's love?
Right.
You know, that's
And torture
hurtful.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the problem with I mean there's a whole bunch of problems with that teaching, but one of the main problems that I see is that if you teach people that, if you say to people, well, you're so jacked up, you're so screwed up, you have so many issues, you're so arrogant, you're so prideful, you're so whatever you are, that but yet God really does still want to use you, but you're so screwed up
Yeah.
that you're just not ready. So he's simply going to have to torture you over and over again, whether you want to call it wilderness or crushing or whatever it is. He's like that. He's going to do this to you. Not persecution, which of course is part and parcel for every believer. At some level, you're going to be persecuted, depending on who you are and your situation, and maybe what God calls you to. You
Or
might get very little.
consequences for decisions or actions that are natural consequences.
Right. So you have that. I mean, you see this kind of stuff, but then when you tell someone that about the crushing and torture and wilderness, whatever you want to call it, then every single negative thing that comes into your life is now going to go through the paradigm of I'm being crushed. So every bad thing that comes to you, you're now welcoming it as the judgment of God or the wrath of God or God's preparatory thing, as opposed to maybe this is the enemy, maybe this is bad, maybe this is like, maybe God doesn't operate in cancer. You know what I'm saying? Like, but every single thing that you go through will always be through that lens. And then how that becomes really bad is if you begin to see every negative, awful, terrible thing that happens to you as God's preparation or as crushing or whatever. What does that mean about you? It either means you have this unbelievably huge call, whatever that means, or it means that you are the worst person on the planet, that you have to be tortured so voraciously.
Yeah. Well, the blood of Jesus just wasn't enough. You had to have the blood
No,
of Jesus and punishment.
and punishment, which is a very Catholic idea. But you have to have the blood of Jesus plus whatever it is in order to finally make you okay, to purge you of all the badness, or I guess to bring the goodness out of you. I don't know how that works exactly, but I was raised on these teachings. I heard these teachings like over and over again. Um, but yeah, then it also becomes, well, when is it enough? When are you finally magically on the other side of that? What if you don't have this, whatever a big call? I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Like, you have a microphone and a million followers. I don't. What does that look like? I don't know what a big calling is supposed to be. I'm super confused about that. But whatever that is supposed to be, if you never achieve, because what happens then is, if you tell people, well, he's got to crush you for this big huge calling, well, people are going to begin to then in their own head, like, come up with what their definition of that is. You see what I mean? So like,
Yeah.
their whatever their definition of a big calling is, they're going to have to create one. So they'll begin to create some, if it's not spelled out for them. And I've never really ever heard it spelled out. So I guess you just leave it up to the listeners to decide what a big calling is. So each individual is coming up with that idea. So if you never see it, what does that say about you?
Yeah. If it never comes to fruition. Yep.
Yeah, if it never comes to fruition, whatever your idea of a big calling is, what what does it say about you?
Well, it says that you didn't do enough to earn it.
Yeah,
That you
like
were not good enough, or didn't do the right,
right,
number of whatever, number of hours of prayer a day, or whatever discipline you want to put in there. You weren't worthy, but it
right,
completely dismisses the power of the blood of Jesus.
yes, because that's just not enough, and His love is just not enough, and Jesus' blood sacrifice is not enough, and faith in that is not enough, and the simple gospel is not enough, and the kingdom of God is not enough, and everything the apostles talk about, the depth and the nature and the searching the riches of Jesus, is also not enough. You must be tortured. And of course, they never use that word because that would sound really bad, right? The way you have to paint it in such a way. I use the word torture
Yeah,
because I
that
just
does not
cut through the
test well in a
BS.
marketing audience, by the way. You must
No,
be
like,
tortured.
so, but when you cut all the flowery language out of it,
Hmm.
and you cut all the language that makes it sound so holy and so righteous and so deep and so, whatever, and that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I like to cut right to the chase and just be like, let's stop the BS and say what we're actually saying. But nobody uses that. You have to flower it up and call it different things in order to sort of sanctify it, so that it then sounds like it's the hand of God, for your good, the hand of God coming at you for your own good. And then they use the scriptures in Hebrews, for instance, about discipline, and they will then take it and say, well, that's that, without any understanding or exegesis of the context of what the writer of Hebrews means when he talks about, if you're a son, you'll receive discipline. Who's he writing? None of that, which we don't. I don't think we need to do that here. I have time to do that now. It'd get us off topic a bit, but they don't do that at all. It's just, let's just pull out any scripture we can to sort of back up that idea, and then jam it down people's throats until everything in their life is a pile of crap, and they're like, yay God. You know what I mean?
Well, I would endeavor to say that just that one commandment in the take on that we've covered now was probably fairly enlightening to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So let's move to the next one,
Alrighty.
which I also couldn't wait to get to.
Yes.
Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, or in it you shall not do any work. You or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. But in short, keep the Sabbath day.
Keep the Sabbath day. Yes. It's interesting how he says, remember the Sabbath day is the actual commandment.
Yeah.
To keep it holy. What does that mean to keep it holy? Well, first of all, remember it. Does that mean you just sit around and go, yeah, I remember that day? You know, like I forgot about that day 6 days ago, but I remember it now. Like I just fulfilled the commandment because I now remember that there is such thing as a Sabbath day. Sorry.
Man, my mind will be on a tangent for the rest of this episode now
Oh
for
boy.
that one statement. That's awesome. Oh man, yeah. Well, let's
What do you
cut.
think?
Let's. Well, my mind's going two areas. First, now it's all about remember. So thank you for that.
Yeah, so we don't actually have to do anything. We just have to remember that it's a day.
Yeah. So, and if I look at just the definition of the word used, according to what I'm
Yeah.
looking at, name, mention, remember, make known, profess, praise, which none of that would, I guess you could probably put observe, would probably be another synonymous word, which is very different than what you said a minute ago when we referenced keep, remember versus keep, right? There's
Yes.
a kind of a mental positioning, an understanding versus there's an action that you have to take. I think that would be the comparison of the two. But all of that being said, I guess am on the right path with understanding where you were going with it, and B, what does it actually mean? What are we actually supposed to be doing, or what even were they supposed to be doing in remembering that day?
Well, let's go. Let's first of all, let's just make the point, the understanding that this is the only commandment not reissued under the new covenant. It's not um, spoken of as a commandment. So we have kind of these 9 of 10 that we have reissued, and but this one is not given again. Now, here's the interesting thing. That's why remember the Sabbath day is a very important word. It's a unique word. So let me ask you this. Do you remember all the feasts that the Jews were supposed to keep?
Yeah.
Now, there were feasts under the law, and there were feasts that they were supposed to keep that that were not under the law,
Okay.
that they just kept of their own accord. So there's a lot of feasts. The Feast of Tabernacle, for instance, um, Feast of Unleavened Bread. You have, but then you have 2 feasts that are not under the law that Jews still keep to this day. One of them is Purim. It's called Purim, and the other one is called Hanukkah. So do you know why they celebrate those 2 feasts that are again not mentioned in the law, but they are feasts that and celebrations that Jews still keep to this day?
I don't know about Purim.
Okay, so Purim is the celebration of Esther, that the Esther's deliverance of the Jewish people from destruction.
Okay.
So they'll do a lot of things during the Feast of Purim to remind them of like Mordecai and what Esther did and so on, right? Um, then there is Hanukkah. Do you know what that is a celebration of?
Of the Maccabee
Mm-hmm.
revolt.
Yeah, the Maccabean rebellion against Antiochus Epiphanes, right? Antiochus Epiphanes, who desecrated the temple, which was prophesied by Zechariah, for instance. And he came in or by Daniel in Daniel chapter 11 for sure. He prophesies coming of Antiochus Epiphanes. He actually sacrifices a pig unto Zeus on the altar there in the temple. And basically, the Jews were under severe oppression, and a group of priests essentially rose up under Maccabees and revolted, kind of guerrilla warfare style. And at one point, I haven't studied this in a while, so I might get this wrong, but at one point, the menorah in the temple burned, the oil that was in there burned for 8 days, like miraculously, where normally it would only burn for one. They saw that as a miracle, so it became this 8 day celebration of Hanukkah to celebrate that victory. So let me tell you. So the reason I'm bringing that up is why celebrate those feasts annually.
I guess well, I'm going to use the word to remember what the Lord did, to keep it front of mind, to celebrate it, to make sure that you are recognizing it out of gratitude.
Absolutely correct. And think about the Passover. That's another feast called the Passover. What are we celebrating? We're celebrating that God spared the Jews and killed the Egyptians. Like, this is, the freedom coming out of bondage, right? So we're celebrating that. Well, we're doing that to remember what God did. And which, by the way, I think is why it's in close context to don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Because they're saying, remember this so you'll remember who God is. So when he says, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy, what are they doing? They're remembering that every single thing created around them was created by God. And on the seventh day, he rested. Right? So by resting that day as he did, they're reminding themselves literally every week of who God is, that he created everything around them, that he is the creator, that he's due all honor. By resting, you're mimicking God and then reminding yourself of the fact that he in fact created everything. It's even worded like that, like how he says, so remember the Sabbath by keeping it holy. And what that means is set it apart. And then he goes on to say, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, etc., etc. For verse 11, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth. Do you see that? The sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. So what's the idea? The idea is that just like Purim, just like Hanukkah, just like Passover, just like Feast of Tabernacles or whatever, we're all done as cultural things to remind them of God the Creator and who God is. So keep it holy. That was the idea behind that commandment. At least that's the force of it.
So it's almost like living not just the Sabbath day, but it's living the pattern of the week itself, of creation. All of
Correct.
the work.
It's to remind, yes, because you're work, just like God did. You're creating, you're cultivating, you're doing all of this stuff, and then you rest, just like God did. And it reminds us that God created and rested. That's the whole idea behind it, is to remind them who God is. And remember what I said before, the idea of every commandment, even the one that we don't have repeated, is to maximize love. Well, one of the ways you maximize love is you get to know very deeply the one whom you love. And this is one way to do that, to follow, to mimic, which again goes back to don't use the name of the Lord your God in vain. You see what I mean?
Yeah, and really, if you look at even the first two commandments, it would seem to me that all of the first three really flow into this fourth one, from understanding that there are no gods other than him.
Yes.
He's the only one that could have done everything in 6 days and
Everything
rested
you
on the
see.
seventh. He's the only one that could have done this. By the way, there's nothing that you're going to do. No little carved idol that you're going to make that's going to be able to do this and to love
Mm-hmm.
you for your sake. And because of this, you better represent him the right way. His heart,
Mm-hmm.
his identity, the
Yes.
intent of his word. And to help you do all of that and to come into even closer connection and understanding of who he is,
Mm-hmm.
then weekly remind yourself of that. So it's
Mm-hmm.
really just, if anything, we've talked about things not being formulaic in the New
Mm-hmm.
Testament and how Paul is really um, intentional about not
Mm-hmm.
making things formulaic. But if anything could be, it might be this. It's a formula to at least help you. It's a pattern to
Mm-hmm.
help you probably fulfill those first three commandments more than anything else.
Again, yes, the idea is remember who God is and get to know him. That's what all of the commandments are about. That, to maximize love, which is to maximize God, right? That's what we're doing. And we're maximizing God in our own understanding and in our own experience.
Yeah.
And he just inserts a cultural, you know, thing. So and what it became, of course, and what it becomes to some believers, like as does everything, is it becomes this religious thing that we now have to perform, which is why this is what happened with the Pharisees and the scribes is they saw the commandment and they said, well, what does work mean? What is it to work? And they're like, well, now they had to make rules for every single thing to define what work was. So, like, if your donkey fell into a hole, on the Sabbath, can you pull him out or not? Like, is that work? And they made rules for, like, you can walk 40 feet, but you can't walk 41 feet. Things like that. And so they began to just, like, make rules and regulations to define what work actually was. And then what they ended up doing is making way more work for themselves to try and achieve not working.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting when we were in Israel. We were on the Sea of Galilee, and on the Sabbath, they would have you couldn't even push buttons in the elevator to the
Yeah,
hotel.
Sabbath elevators. Yeah.
Yeah, so they would have the elevator. What I thought was odd is that the elevator would automatically stop on every other floor. So I'm thinking, well, now I've got to work to walk up or down the stairs at least one
Right.
flight if it doesn't stop on mine. So I don't understand
Yep.
like where's the trade-off? I can't push a button, but I can walk a flight of stairs. So when I get to my room, I can turn on the light switch. So I really couldn't understand. Like I just couldn't grasp whatever rules were in place to be able to observe it in the way that they thought was appropriate. But,
Right.
and even now, I went to grad school with a guy who was studying the Talmud. Like
Yeah.
he was in Talmud school. I don't know if that's what it's called, but one of his jobs, he said, was to ride around this area in New York City and see if there was this, this wire put up or this with flags on it, or he was describing it to me. And I just found it so interesting because if the wire was down, they had to know it and they had to be able to fix it before the Sabbath started, because that was the indicator of where your neighborhood was. And you could walk
Yeah.
for however many city blocks in New York or one of the boroughs this was, but you couldn't go back beyond this line of demarcation, because then you've gone outside of your house or your area, that 40 feet, I guess,
Right.
as
Yeah.
you mentioned. And it just seemed, I didn't want to offend him, but I had like 1,000 questions just after hearing the story. Like, how is that not arbitrary? Or why not
Yeah.
6 city blocks instead of 5 city
Right.
blocks? Why not? It just seems so odd to me. But obviously he's Jewish. For those who are practicing Jews, man, this is still a huge deal.
Yes.
And even for Christians, what I see a lot is the old Facebook posts of, this is the Lord's Day, or tomorrow's the Lord's Day, which
Right.
I'm thinking, well,
Yeah.
every day's kind of the Lord's Day, I thought. But,
Yeah.
tomorrow's the Lord's Day. You have to go to church. You have to do, that's the day that you've got to do this. So even Christians, although we might not completely relax, we're going to do yard work or whatever it is that we're going to do.
Right.
But hey, you better go. Like, it's like the Christian version of keeping the Sabbath is making sure you've
Right.
gone to a church
Make
building.
sure you go to church. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Unless you're Seventh-day Adventist, then you better go on Saturday, because that's the only day you can go, and they're very vehement about this.
I
You have to
heard
go to
that.
church on Saturday, and you can't go any other day like that. If you're not going, because the Jews was actually Saturday, not Sunday. So somehow this means we need to go to church on Sunday. So,
Crazy.
well, yeah, it's so funny because you see Jesus just flying in the face of the Pharisees, and in particular on keeping the Sabbath. Right? Remember, they got all mad at him because he healed a guy on the Sabbath, which was
Yeah.
unlawful to do. Remember,
Yeah.
they yelled at the disciples because they were gathering grain
They ate some grain.
that had fallen from the field. What's that?
They ate some grain. I'm following
Yeah,
you.
they ate grain. You could eat the grain, but you can't gather it, right? So they get rebuked for that. Like, and Jesus is like, what is wrong with you people? Like, this is not the point, right? And that's the whole idea with all these religious rules. Is it's like, what is the point? Like, I was just reading this today in 2 Corinthians 3, where Paul talks about the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. He's like, if you're reading the letter of the law and you don't understand the spirit of the law, then it will kill you. It's not just an issue of, let's understand the letter of these 10 commandments. The issue is, what's the spirit behind them? What is driving this commandment? What is the point of this commandment? And it all boils down to love and honor and knowing God.
And without that, it just becomes activity. It's action.
Yes.
Something to check off of a list.
Well, it's called religion. It just becomes a religion. That's all it is.
There you
It's
go.
like, these are the things we do. This is what we don't do. It's like, well, why? What is that about? And that's why I hope people are learning as we're going through these commandments, that you're seeing, like, well, that's why. They were required to do this because they needed to know who God was. He created everything, that He's so big and so amazing. That's why you don't make an idol to somebody else, because we're worshiping the God that created everything. And that's why we're working 6 days and resting, just like He did.
Wow.
It's just on and on like that.
So you already let on that is the one that is not carried over into the new covenant. But Nathan,
Oh boy.
there's got to be more to it than that. What do you mean it doesn't carry over? And I would like to ask that question and leave it as a cliffhanger, because we said that we were going to cover all 10 and then talk about how, like, where do we see this? So I think that's probably a really good cliffhanger for people to go, well, hold on.
Yeah.
If that doesn't carry over, what does that mean to us? And so, that's just kind of a teaser for an episode that'll come up after we go through all 10. We'll go back and say, here's where it all is today. So Is that good with you?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Good deal. Well, that we're over an hour, and I think we've covered two more commandments, which I think that puts us at a good spot to stop for this episode, and we can pick up the next one, and we can honor our mother and father and start there next time.
Heck yeah.
And until then, tell us how we can ask questions. How can we get in touch with Nathan, the wise one, and
Oh, goodness
ask,
me.
please cover these things for us?
Well, I don't know how you can get a hold of Nathan the Wise One, but I'll tell you how you can get a hold of me. So you can go, you can go to unleashministries.net and click on Ask Me, and it's easy to get a hold of me. And maybe I could lead you to Nathan the Wise One, whoever that is. So,
If you want, you can reach out to rocksaltcoaching.com, contact us. You can go to the Facebook page. A lot of people will send it through messaging that way. And if you do that, then I will lead you to Nathan the Wise One, and we can cover it on a future episode. So until then, just remember, like Nathan told you, the commandments are about maximizing love. And Nathan, I kind of feel like that's what our whole podcast is about. It's about maximizing love.
I mean, I think that's what the gospel is about. It's about the revelation of Jesus Christ, who through him we are led and have direct access to the Father. And we get to know him and he gets to know us at the deepest levels possible. And that's why we're transformed and we change the world. I mean, that's what this is about. Relationship, intimacy, love, transformation. I mean, wow, you know?
Yeah, what you said last episode when you covered the first commandment, that he loves us not because he has an ego to fulfill or to support or to build up. He loves us not for his sake. He loves us for our sake.
Mm-hmm.
Man, when you really let that soak in, that alone is life-changing.
Yeah.
That should make you feel invincible and valuable and worthwhile. I mean, that should be the most encouraging message you can hear.
Well, and the coolest thing to me was always like, he wants us to love him because he knows it's the best thing for us.
That's awesome.
You know, he knows us loving him is the best thing for us and human beings in general. You know, he's not like, you better love me. You know, you guys better love me with everything you are. It's like, well, no, I mean, yeah, but he's saying that because he knows the human being loving God is the only way to be a full human being.
Yeah. He's not a fragile narcissist.
No, he doesn't need our worship or need our love or need anything. He doesn't need anything because he is all sufficient within himself.
Now we've kind of gone on a little bit of a tangent, but I got to say it. Think about what that really says about love. What love actually is in its purest, most wonderful and holy state. It's always about the other person.
Yes. That's what love always has been about.
That's amazing.
What's the most loving thing I can do that will fully bless someone else? I mean, that's what love is.
Wow. Well, my friend, my brother, I love you.
Love you too, man.
Everybody listening, we love you all. We can't thank you enough for spending these episodes with us. It's a lot of fun, and we can't wait until next time.
And shout out to you, Austin. Giving you a shout out. Met Austin at church this last week. He's a Soul Brothers listener. I'm just giving you a shout out, buddy. So hopefully you'll be listening to this and get this.
Awesome. Austin, you are loved, man. How
yes.
Cool. All right. Catch you next episode.